Hi, Dave Scotland for AE Tuts, and welcome to another episode of Nuke in Production. Today we're going to take a look at some of the customization features in Nuke and how you can use these features to really streamline your workflow and set yourself up with some custom tools, especially for those tasks that you use over and over. What I'm going to do is start off with some really basic examples of some of the customization techniques in Nuke, and then later on I'm going to walk through a far more advanced example, and I'm also going to provide that example to you for your own workflow and to reverse engineer the process and really customize an already custom tool set. So before we get started, I just need to show you a couple of things in relation to the files and where things sit in the actual file system. First of all, I'll bring up the actual files, the program files, and you'll see that inside the folder there is a plugins directory. Now, please don't get this confused with the way After Effects treats a plugin directory, where this is the location where you store your plugins. There's a lot more going on inside this plugins directory, and what I strongly suggest is that if you don't know what you're doing, do not go into this plugins directory and start changing anything, because unless you know what you're doing, the ability to reverse those changes, it's actually quite a difficult task, and what you'll probably inevitably have to do is reinstall Nuke. So be very careful going into this plugins directory. Now, having said that, there's two files in here that are very important when it comes to customizing Nuke. One is the init, if I just bring it up here. Here it is here, the init.py. Now, py is short for a Python script, and I'm just going to launch into it. Now, you'll notice that the tool I'm using is a Notepad++. Now, that's a free tool. What I strongly suggest, in fact, I'm telling you, definitely don't do it. Do not open a py file that is of any importance in a WordPad or a Word editor, because there are characters that can get added to the script and you will not know that they're actually there. They're hidden characters, and this is perfectly fine in a Word world, but not so good in a Python script for Nuke world. So what you do is use one of the predetermined or recommended script editing packages. I use Notepad++, and when you open it up, you'll see that it's a very different looking editor. It's got the numbers down the side. It recognizes hashed out lines or rem lines, and it also recognizes a lot of the standard syntax in a scripting world or scripting language. Now, in the init.py, this is the file that actually gets launched when you first start Nuke, and a lot of the functionality of the application itself comes from this particular script. And if we take a close look, we can actually see that there's a little section here that says Nuke plugin add path .user. Now, what this is actually telling Nuke is that there is a plugin path. Now, there's one above it. This one here is set to the root, and this one here is set to .user. Now, this is standard for a standard installation of Nuke 7. And so I don't actually have to amend anything in this init. Now, in previous versions, I would have had to have gone in and added an extra path if I wanted to give an extra location for customizing or creating gizmos and things like that. But I don't need to in the later versions because of this entry here. Now, I'm just going to close this down and close this as well. The other one that's pretty important in this list is the menu. Menu.py, this one here, menu.py, and if I open that one up in our Notepad++, you'll see that basically this particular script is the script that loads the interface, that tells the interface. This is a good section to show you here. It's the file pull-down menu, and you can see that there is a new, open, save as, and a lot of these features can be found in Nuke up here in the file pull-down menu. And then you've got your edit pull-down menu, your layout pull-down menu. So let's take a look at this layout pull-down menu. If we jump down the list a little bit, you'll see that there is an actual layout menu. There's the bookmark. Come down, and here it is here. So here is the layout menu in this menu.py script. And this is telling Nuke how to load all of the information into this menu up in here. So everything that you see in your user interface here is constructed using this menu.py. Now, because we have a user path as well, what Nuke actually does is it consults this script first, because it's sitting in the root directory, plugins directory, and it runs this script to build the interface. But then it also takes a look, before it finishes loading Nuke, it takes a look at your user path. And if it also finds a menu.py file in your user path, then it will run the functions, or it will run the script contents from that user path as a secondary process. Now, I'll show you what that means. If I just bring up my file browser, so we're here in the program files, but what I'm going to do is come down to here where it says users, and this is my user account here, and you'll see that there is a folder called .nuke. Now that is the actual user path that was referred to in the init.py file. And in here, don't be surprised if you jump into this for the first time, and obviously Dave is not going to be your user path, it'll be whatever account that you use that machine on. Don't be surprised if this is empty, if it only has 1 or 2 files at most, and don't even be surprised if menu.py isn't even there, and if it is, it may actually be empty. But I'm going to open up the one that's in mine, and notice it's completely different to the one that sits in the C drive, and it has very little going on in it at all. And at the moment, the only thing really that's been added to it is a third-party plugin, which is Trapcode Particular for Nuke, and also we have down here some camera presets. Now what I've got is an actual camera presets file that is being referred to in Nuke, so that when I'm doing some 3D camera tracking, I've actually got a file that has all the information for all the common cameras that are available. But there's not much else going on in here. Now, as we customize the user interface, what we want to be doing is we want to be customizing this script here, and we also want to be customizing this directory here, and not the directory back here in the C programs folder. C programs, Nuke, and then plugins. So that being said, I had to get the boring stuff out of the road, but at least now you are aware of what you need. Now, one last thing, make sure that this folder here has get rid of the read-only access to that folder. Apply changes to folder and sub and go OK. Just in case there are some security issues on that folder, you want to make sure you remove them, and that way we can write files into there and we can place files into there. So I'm going to go ahead and close this down. Let's get started by having a look at some of the really basic customization tools in Nuke. So one that I use quite a lot is a very simple color correction pipeline, just to tweak up the image and just to have a look at how things are going. Now, I could be adding a whole lot of other nodes, but ultimately it's going to come down to a very basic global color tweaking at the end. So let's go ahead. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a grade node on it, and I'm going to use a saturation node as well, and I'll use a color correct, and probably the last thing I'll do a color lookup, and we'll just leave those there for now. And you will see, if I just pull this off to the side, if I go into that grade node, I can gain it up, gamma it down to give it some heavy contrast, probably go into the lookup, maybe tweak the red, maybe bring a little bit of the red values out in the image, maybe drop the high-end red down, and so on. I could go to the saturation, maybe tweak it down. Now, let's say that particular tool set there is something I use a lot. I use it over and over and over again, and I want it in its basic format. So I'm just going to reset everything. In fact, it's probably easier that I just delete these. Hit G for grade, saturation, C for color correction, and then color lookup. Pull these out to the side. So just say this is my color correction tool set that I want to use over and over again. There is a really cool tool for doing this, for setting yourself up with that little tool set. And if I highlight these, I can go into this little icon over here, which is called Toolsets. Click on that and go Create. Now I can give it a name, and I'm just going to call this, let's call it Fast CC, Fast Color Correct, and go Create. Now what I'm going to do is just delete these. With my read node selected, I can come over to here once again, click on the menu, and you'll see now that I have a choice called Fast CC. If I click on it, there they are. It doesn't just have to do blank nodes or nodes that don't have amendments in them. What I'm going to do is come up here, and this time I'll delete that tool set out of there. And I'm going to go into my grade node. I'm going to really saturate it quite a bit. And then I'll go into my saturation level and just drag it down. And then I might even jump into the color correct and maybe grab the midtones and maybe cool down the midtones. Now I can grab that and go into my tool sets, just go create, and this time let's call it Fast Cool VW, black and white. Go create. Now if I delete these, I can just simply go up and load that in as a preset. So it's not just about getting a bunch of nodes together and saving those as a group of nodes. It will actually save all of the current setup for any one of those nodes. So I think you'll agree that that's a very powerful scenario. For After Effects users, it's very simple. It's very similar to your animation presets, where you can literally set up an animation preset for a whole bunch of different effects, and you can apply them to a certain layer. But the only difference here is that I've literally got them applied as nodes, and I can plug these nodes into any number of different assets and any number of different orientations down through my pipeline. So it's a very powerful tool. It does have its limitations, but it's fantastic for something that you use over and over again. So that's the tool sets up here. I'm just going to go in and delete that preset and get rid of these. Now the next one I wanted to show you is gizmos. Now gizmos are a fantastic way to automate a setup, a set of tools, a set of nodes. It's a fantastic way to set up something that is something that you do over and over again, but that is quite complex. What you can do is set that up, save it out as a group, and then tell that group to actually take on the role of a node in your pipeline, and you can actually set up customizable preset features that you can tweak that will in turn tweak the internal workings of that node. Now that sounds a bit complex. I'm going to show you exactly what that means. I'm going to do the same again as I did before. I'm just going to do a grade, a saturation. Let's go with a color correct and a color lookup. I'm just going to pull these off to the side a little bit. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to take these, I'm going to right click. I can do it right click, or there is another alternative, Control G. Now what that does is it basically creates a group, and it also opens a brand new tab here in my node graph called Group 1. Now I'm just going to go up here and I'm just going to call it CC, let's call it Fast CC Control. And you'll notice here that it's just giving me the node information for this, and I really can't do much to it at all. But if I go into the group, which is in here, you'll see that it has an input node, it has an output node, and it has my 4 variations here. And what I can actually do with this is start to customize this interface, which is the one we see back in my master node graph. Now, I know that I'm always going to need to tweak the saturation of my image. So what I can do is right click on an empty space up in here, and I can go Manage User Knobs. Now if I click on that, this panel comes up, and I can actually pick from the nodes within the group. And I'm going to look for saturation and go into the saturation here, and there's the feature that I want. It's saturation. If I go OK, notice now I have a user panel here, and I also have a feature called saturation. Now if I go done to this, I can actually control the saturation of my image from outside of the group, and what it's actually doing is controlling. If I wind this up to 4, you'll see if I double click on that saturation, it's up to 4. So basically what I'm doing is I'm controlling the nodes which are inside the group from the controls outside the group, which is here. Now I can manage the new user knobs again, and I can go into this saturation edit, and I can change the label. Let's call this global saturation. We'll leave the name. The name is more for the scripting side of things, and it actually gives you a little hint here of what the knob is linked to, and it's actually linked to saturation1.saturation, and you'll see if I go OK to that and go done, in the group it is saturation 1, and inside that saturation is the feature saturation. So that's where it's getting the saturation1.saturation. So it starts to make sense. So let's have a look at the color correction now, and we'll go back to our controls here. I'm going to right click, manage user knobs. I'm going to go to pick, and we'll go to our color correct one, go into our color correction, and let's look for our highlights, and I'm going to look for highlights gain, just to throw something in there so we can control something as an alternative to saturation. And with this highlights gain, I'm going to edit it, and I'm just going to call it in the labels. So let's just call it highlight gain and go OK. And you can see now in my controls I have highlight gain. And what I want to do is separate these two here. In fact, I'm going to go in, I'm going to pick, I'm going to stay in that color correct, into the color correction. I'm going to go midtones gain as well, and I'm going to hold down control and go shadows gain as well and go OK. Now they're in the wrong order and they need some labels, so I'm just going to edit this one. This one's for midtones gain, and we'll do the last one there is shadows gain. We'll edit that. And what I want to do is separate these gains from the global saturation. So what I can do is add, and this is a different section, it's not in the pick, this is an add, and we're going to go a divide line. And you can see here that there's a line now, and I just move it up in the list, and you can see that we now have a separation between the global saturation and the gains. So let's take, for instance, this saturation. I'm going to edit it, and I'm going to put in a tooltip. Let's say saturation of the whole image. So it's a bit obvious, but if we go OK. So now if I hold my mouse over the slider here, I can actually get a tooltip, and you can see that by changing this, it's the saturation of the whole image, and I could have put whatever I wanted in that tooltip. So I can wind that saturation down now, and let's jump into the, let's change the order here quickly. I'm just going to go back into my user knobs, and I'm going to put the shadows at the top and the highlights at the bottom, and the highlights at the bottom, and just go done. So what I might do is I'm going to cool down my shadows, and maybe the midtones as well, not too much, a little bit there. Maybe darken them down slightly, and then what we'll do is just warm up the highlights a little bit. Not too much. That's probably about it. And you can see now that we have complete control over this group and the nodes within it. So these are the nodes, and I can add nodes. How about we put a blur in here? Let's stick a blur node in here, and let's jump back out into our node graph. I'm going to hide that blur node there. I'm just going to right click, manage user knobs, and now if I pick, you'll see that I have a blur available. I can go into the blur, and let's just say the size, and go OK. And let's put a divider in there as well. Let's just move this across. Let's put a divider in there, and move that divider up to separate those, and just say done. So there you can see we have control. Now this is a fantastic feature in Nuke, and what I want to show you next is a far more advanced version of this, At the moment, it's just a group, and it's a great way to stay organized. It's similar in some ways, it's similar in After Effects to what we call pre-comping, where we're pre-comping effects, and inside that effect, we've literally got an input and an output, and that is what's working here. We're piping something in, and then we're piping out into the viewer. I could certainly add things. I could put a glow out here, and this is just on the other side. It's coming out of the group and then into the glow and then down to the viewer. And I could tweak the tolerance here a little bit, desaturate the glow, maybe bring it up, and bloom the size out quite a bit. And so this is actually feeding from this here, so we could bring the size out, saturation up or down. And the group is self-contained with its own controls. Now, this is a fantastic way to work, but the problem with it is that the scene itself will actually get quite heavy when it's working in this way. What we really want to do is turn this into a function of its own, similar to this glow node is a node, and what we want to do is set this as a node as well, and with its own functions. So this is a very basic version. I'm going to show you now a much more complex version of this. So here we are in a new Nuke script, and you can see I've just got some footage here. It's just a simple camera turnaround, and I've got a group. Now you can tell it's a group because it's got the two arrows or the two chevrons on either side of the node icon. Now what I can actually do to go into this group, if I double click on it, it just brings up its properties here, which I'll explain shortly. But in order to open it up, I can right click, just go into edit, go down to node, group, and open group node graph, or use the control enter shortcut key. And you'll see here that now I have its own tab for the group. And let's zoom in and have a look at what we've got to work with. Just going to maximize this a little bit so we can see what we're doing. We've got an input at the top, comes in. In fact, what I might do is just minimize that and pull this over into here, just so we can see with a bit of a viewport happening over here as well. So I've got an input happening here. It comes down into this merge. If we just have a look here, and in this merge this is an anamorphic solid, where it's just giving me the cinema bars here, and then I've got an anamorphic. If I switch this off, there's a semi-transparent anamorphic framing, the cinema bars at the top and the bottom. And then if I come down the list a little further, I've got a logo, and this is the logo section here. Come down the list a little further again, and I've got these static elements. Now the static elements are these descriptors here. These are just text objects: script name, artist name, date, current frames, total frames. So these are static elements that don't change. And then over here I've got dynamic elements that actually read information. Now with these there's a little bit more involved. If I was to double click on this text element here, you can see that it's actually got a little bit of script, a little bit of an expression in the message instead of just text. And it says knob shot name, and it's referring to the shot name over here. If I have a look back in my main node graph and double click on the actual group, you'll see that there is an element here for the shot name. And if I right click and manage user knobs, notice the second one from the top, it says shot name, and then it says shot name. If I edit that, it's actually referring the user knob, the actual knob is called shot name. So that when we're looking at that text object and it's referring to shot name, what it's actually doing is referring to the user knob shot name in these controls here, and it's typing out what that shot name will be. So if I just close this up, and then I'll fill this in, let's say fill in the artist name, and then fill in the shot name as well. And you'll see that that's actually populated in my user interface here as well. And you can also see that I can hide the solid cinema bars. I can hide the solid cinema bars, I can hide the transparent cinema bars, and I can also hide or reveal the actual user information, which I just need to jump back into here and get rid of the viewer. And we want to be looking at this one in our viewer. So with the HD slate properties here, I can hide the cinema bars, unhide, and hide the information. So I can literally render this out as a final if I wanted a 1080. This is a HD slate that I use a lot. I tend to work a lot on HD projects where the product needs to look anamorphic and therefore includes a solid cinema bars scenario like this, and this is a true anamorphic resolution representation. And this one is for production renders, so that whoever I'm rendering this for to have a look for previews and things like that, they have the frame number here, they have the total frame amount, which is all taken care of with scripts within that gizmo. And I've also got a time of date every time the file gets saved. This time and date is completely accurate. And also a place for a shot number, a logo for the production, and also a color bar and a grayscale gradient there as well to use. So this type of slate, I always do use this in any project I'm using. I set it up very quickly, but at the moment it's just a group, and so it's only any good if you're in this file. What I want to do is make sure this HD slate is available to me in any scene that I'm starting. So what I'm going to do is show you how to turn this into a Nuke gizmo. So I'm going to leave the shot information up and untick these two. I'm going to put these back to their default. So let's go shot name here and artist name here. And before we turn this into a gizmo, we definitely want to make sure that the group that it's going to be based on is set up correctly, because once we've turned this into a gizmo, we won't be able to get back into the inner workings of the gizmo. We will be able to convert it to a group, and that puts us back at square one, but we won't be able to go in and hand tweak any of these once it's a gizmo. It's all baked into effectively a node. So we definitely want to make sure everything is the way it needs to be in here. And I've already double checked it, so we should be good to go. I'm just going to close that slate down there. And when we double click on our group down here to bring up this, if you go to node, there is a button that says export as gizmo. So I'm going to click on that, and it allows me to navigate to where I want this to go. Now, as I mentioned before, we want this to go to my .user location, not my C drive location, not my application specific plugins directory, but my user location. So to do that, I'm just going to navigate down to users and Dave. Now you'll notice first off that I can't see the .nuke file. So what I will have to do is type in here .nuke. And as soon as I start typing that, it's available to me here, and I can click on that. Now, I've got a previous version here saved, but what I'm going to do is rename it to HD underscore slate. So we'll use this pristine version, and always make sure that you put an extension. Unlike normal Windows operations, in Nuke, even though it says filter here, it doesn't always put the surname or the extension on the end of the file. So just always make sure that you type, even if you're rendering as a TGA sequence or a JPEG, just put JPG on the end of it, or a TGA on the end of it, to make sure that it does actually save out as the right file format. So hdslate.gizmo, it's in the right location, and I'm just going to go save. So the next thing I need to do to turn my gizmo into an actual function that I can use in any scene or any Nuke comp is to create a little bit of an amendment in my menu.py script. So I'm just going to open that up, edit with Nuke. Now remember, once again, I'm using the one in my user directory, not the menu.py in my plugins directory on my C install directory. So you can see here that here is my, where is it? Here is my hdslate.gizmo. And so what I'm going to do, rather than you watch me type all this out, I'm just going to cut and paste it from a previous version that I did. Just paste it in here on a new line, and I'll just quickly explain what it's doing. Menu bar equals nuke.menu refers to the actual menu bar of the tools down the side here. And it's saying that this process that's about to be done is happening to the menu bar. So menu bar equals nuke.menu is referring to this menu here. It could be a different menu, and it would create a totally different menu, and you can have as many tool set menus as you want in Nuke. And it's saying that m equals menu bar.add menu. So it's saying I want to add a menu, and the menu is called Dave. Don't need that and there. And then inside that menu called Dave, I want to add a command called hdslate. And then it calls to a Nuke create node, and it's pointing to the actual file that we saved. Now, the hdslate that we saved had an underscore in it, so hd_slate.gizmo is correct. And then here, this part here is actually a shortcut key. So shift plus return is the shortcut key that I'm assigning to my brand new tool. And then I've also got an icon, and this is an icon I did up a little while ago. I'll just show you what that looks like. It's just a little icon of a little tiny slate, film slate. You can see it there, a little clapperboard. And that's what's referring to in here. Now, this PNG file is in the same location as my Gizmo file, so it won't have any problems finding it. And everything else looks good. Everything is in the same directory as my menu.py, and that's why I don't need any directory references or directory paths written into here. So I'm just going to go File and Save, and then I'm going to close that down. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to throw a brand new version of Nuke up. Just position it. And what we should be able to do now is read in some footage. Just go open. So I've got my footage there, and you'll notice, or might have noticed, that I've got a new little menu icon here in my menu bar, in my toolbar. If I click on that, there's my HD slate. There's the shortcut key reference there. If I click on it, there is my HD slate. Here's my controls. If I just hide this read node, here's my controls here. Now, the scene is at the wrong res, so if I just hit my project settings, S is the shortcut key, and change this to a HD project. Now, unfortunately, the footage that I brought in was the wrong resolution, so I'm just going to put in a reformat node. This is actually 720 footage. Double click on it and make sure it's set to 1920 1080. So now it fits properly. And if you have a look at my Gizmo, my HD slate, I can type in my information and this and the shot number, and I can reveal or hide the information. You'll notice that it's a 53 frame shot, so sure enough, current frame 53, current frame 29, the total frame 0 to 53, so that's all worked perfectly. The time is working perfectly down here as well, and everything is exactly as it should be. I can hide and reveal the information. I can hide the solid and leave the semi-transparent cinema bars, and I can also hide those and render this out as a solid HD output. Now, you'll notice here that my Gizmo no longer has chevrons at both ends. It actually only has them at one end, and that's how we know that this is actually a Gizmo and not a group. So I can't any longer go into the contents of that group and amend anything inside it. I can only use this here, nor can I actually change any of the user knobs as well. But I think you'll agree it's a fantastic way to really customize the way you work. For any of those processes you use over and over and over again, and you want to make sure that you are doing them the same way each time. Now, think of a large project that has similar color correction processes or color grading, or you might pre-grade the footage to make sure that it's all on the right lookup table or the right level of saturation. Maybe there's a reformat process or a cropping process that needs to happen on every piece of footage as it comes through your pipeline. This is a fantastic way to set up a really fast workflow, and you can set up as much user functionality as you want in the actual node information here, the user settings here, and you can have as many tabs as you want to. But just remember that you're trying to make it easier, not harder. So if this becomes so complex that you would be better off just using the raw nodes, then you're probably working counterintuitively. So bear that in mind. This has in no way been a definitive look at this process, but what I really hope I've done is alluded to a process that will allow you to now be so interested in doing it that you'll go and learn more about it and get the most out of it. Because to me, it's one of the biggest pluses or bonuses going for Nuke over applications like After Effects. There are some customization issues with After Effects or processes with After Effects that aren't too bad, but really nothing comes at the level of customization that can happen in Nuke. And I think one of the strongest reasons for that is the way that it is so script dominant. And I think it's me coming from a 3D Studio Max background, I'll be the first to admit that Maya, the reason why Maya is so successful in the big production houses is because of how friendly it is to customization and to how open it is to re-scripting the way the interface works and the way the pipeline works. Whereas Max, it is much, much harder to do that coming from its CAD background. Now, Nuke, I think, is going to go from strength to strength because of the Python orientation or the script orientation that it has. And when you stick it next to an application like After Effects and like some of the other players in the market, Nuke is just so powerful because it can be hand customized into whatever interface that a particular artist needs, and then that can be rolled out across an entire studio so that everybody's playing on the same playing field. So please do take these files that I've included, reverse engineer them. Definitely use this feature here for any of your work. You can certainly get in, and if you do want to amend this, because it'll be coming to you as a gizmo, or actually no, I'll have to supply it as a group. You will have to turn it into a gizmo because I don't have access to your user menu.py file, so this will be a group. But if you ever do want to fine tune it, and you've lost the original file that you created it in, just go into Edit, come down to Node, Group, and Expand Group, and you'll get all of the contents. Just pull this off to the side a little bit. You'll get all of the contents there still wired to your original footage with your output here, and your original footage up here, and you can see that we're moving down through the process. So you would certainly be able to just grab that and then group that and then create a gizmo out of that group. So it's certainly no problems to go in and reverse engineer somebody else's gizmo by using that process. So I hope you've enjoyed the tutorial. A little bit technical, but definitely well worth it. I think you'll enjoy the process once you get in and start playing and tweaking these settings and customizing your Nuke pipeline. That's it for me. Until next time, bye for now.